Hey, you were listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast that discusses mental health through pop culture. And if you guys grew up in the late 2000s, nothing is more popular or more pop culture than the movie Avatar. And finally, after what feels like a decade and a half of waiting, we have our sequel, Avatar: The Way of Water, and we're going to be dissecting it on this episode. My name is Captain Nostalgia, and I am joined by one of our Marvel correspondents, Mr. Joshua Howell.
That's right. 13 years later, we finally get a sequel. It's finally here.
I'm I guess like let's just start at the top of this. I've already shared my spoiler-free thoughts on the our YouTube. It's youtube.com/ victims and villains. What are your thoughts coming out of this movie though?
Yeah, and I actually actively chose not to listen to that because I didn't want any of our conversations spoiled in advance. So I don't know. I don't know if you liked it or not. I know you didn't really care for the first one, but um I went to see it with my wife and we saw it in IMAX 3D, just like I saw the first one. And we recently saw the re-release, the 4K re-release of the first one last month. And um my wife is a huge environmentalist, and so this was her shit back in 2009, and she was so happy with this film. I went into it hoping that it would, at least attempt to be in the same at the same level as the first one visually. Hope that the story would be a little more profound or just expanded better.
Sure.
But I always liked the first Avatar to a degree. I knew its shortcomings, but I liked the first Avatar and I loved the extended cut. And now this movie is 3 hours and 10 minutes, granted with credits. But I was like, man, I'm gonna fast. I'm not gonna drink all afternoon. I wanna, but I'm gonna need this job, this movie to do a lot of the work to keep me interested for 3 hours and 10 minutes. And non-spoiler thoughts, I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought it definitely felt like the next film in a franchise. It didn't feel like a middle film, but the ending felt more like oh, this is continuing. This is an ongoing saga, but it didn't feel like a letdown of a finale. There was plenty of action. There was an expansion of the story. There was a return for some characters that I didn't expect to return because I haven't watched a lot of the trailers or TV spots, and I didn't read up on this film, so I was surprised at some of the returning cast. And Yeah, and it felt lived in. It's been 13 years since the first one came out, and it felt, I don't think it was actually 13 years in the movie, but it did feel like time had passed and we got a little progression of that time, and we kind of got a short, previously on Avatar thing. And I thought it was a very well constructed sequel and a very well constructed blockbuster. And once again, James Cameron renews my faith in 3D because it was stunning in 3D. So yeah.
Yeah, so so just some behind the scenes of how this podcast episode came together. Originally, this was just going to be like Josh's baby, and it was going to run, and I don't think there was any guests initially lined up, and so I wasn't going to be a part of this episode because I just didn't like the first film. I feel like the first film was like really overhyped, and I will say that I will retract some of my hatred on that first film because I went back, rewatched it, and I feel like now more as a seasoned cinephile and an adult, I definitely think the first film had some unfair hatred for me. I think that I still think the story really lacks, but I think that, for the most part, like there's enough like immersive world building and also like stunning visuals to like hang on and like really entertain me. And I really still think that the third act, like between the humans and the Navi, I feel like is still like a really tight, cool like throwback to like 80s action movies like Rambo, like Die Hard, like Predator, um and like so I also had like a whole bunch of people like compare the movie the movie's plot to Ferngully. I'd never seen Ferngully till earlier this week. I watched Avatar and then watched Ferngully the next day, and I was like, you know what? I could see it now. But I think this movie, like, I came in with like a really low bar in this movie, wasn't sure what to expect. I hadn't seen any trailers, I didn't see any imagery, I didn't know any of the, like Josh, she had mentioned, like the quote unquote returns, surprises in this one. And this movie like surprised the mess out of me. Like I feel like if you're gonna be a 3 hour movie, you have to make the most of it. And this movie, you mentioned the 3D. Like I originally had gotten a ticket to see this in like original, and then I canceled my original ticket, upgraded to 3D because I wanted to see if like the way James Cameron intended for this movie to be seen. And this movie, like, it's weird because, like, I feel like we're in this like spot now as movie going audience where 3D feels like something of the past, to where they still produce movies in 3D, but it feels more gimmicky. It's just like, hey, come check out this 3D and be nostalgic. Whereas I feel like for this movie, the 3D aspect felt like an extension of the world. It immersed you into the Navi culture, both in the forest and in the aquatic sense.
Yeah, I mean, you said the right word, immersive. I think both films, I mean, I totally agree. There's a lot of the first film that is very much Fern Gully, Pocahontas, Dances with Wolves. Even my wife said that the soundtrack has notes of Beautiful Mind and even like Mask of Zorro at times. There's a lot of, you know, you recognize things from other things. And I'm sure you could do that with most movies, but it was pretty blatant with Avatar. But it was an experience. It was an immersive experience. And they doubled down on that for part two. I mean, if you thought you knew this world of Pandora, here's a whole nother part of this world, and a whole nother tribe and other rules and other species. And, it's a lot of this film is you just experiencing that like a theme park ride, and um it's incredible what they did considering the majority of this is CGI, and a lot of it was filmed underwater. James Cameron, water is his baby. He's obsessed with water, whether it's Titanic, whether it's the trench, whether it's just underwater documentary, stuff. He just loves underwater stuff, the abyss. So this is like this is his playing ground. And so to
Yeah.
do that with in an app in a sense of Pandora, I think it was just amazing. And he was supposed to bring Avatar 1 out in 1999, and he just didn't feel like the technology was there. That was the original date for Avatar to
Dang.
drop. So he took another 10 years to develop brand new 3D cameras to film. And I've only seen two 3D movies in the last 15, 20 years, and that's Avatar and Avatar
Jeez.
2. And
Jeez.
it's because the majority, when you see a Marvel movie that comes out in 3D, or when you see any film that come Piranha 3D, whatever, it's post-production 3D. It's not filmed in 3D. James Cameron's Avatar films are filmed in 3D. So it is its native format. And I don't know if he did it with the first one, but this one is filmed in 48 frames per second. And a lot of people did not like that with Peter Jackson's The Hobbit series because it just looked wrong. But they got it right. They got it right in this one. Everything looked smooth. Everything looked, crisp. It didn't come off like a soap opera on fake sets. It just looked good. And I can't wait to go see it again. I always take my mom out to a movie on Christmas, and she cannot take 3D. It makes her sick. So we're gonna see it on a Dolby regular screen in 2D.
Nice.
And I'm sure it'll still look good, but I wanted my first time to see it in 3D on IMAX, and it really did feel like you were there, and it was immersive, and I loved it.
Yeah, I really really do enjoy that. And I've unfortunately I've seen a couple of films in the like I've seen a lot more films in 3D, and that's because like right around the release of the first Avatar, there was like this weird spike.
Oh,
Like
sure.
everyone saw it and they were like, "Oh, we got to jump in on it." So, Saul 7 was released in 3D. My Bloody Valentine was released in 3D.
Yeah.
There was like Drive Angry was released in 3D. Like there were these so many studios were like cashing in on this. And like I
There
said,
was a
like they
boom
were
in 3D TVs.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just actually watched This Is the End for the first time, and the opening scene where Seth goes to get Jay and they like come back. They're like, "Oh, is this 3D?" And I was like, "Wow, 3D TV is something I haven't heard of talk about in a long time."
Yeah. Yeah.
But I feel like for this film, like I've also like I accidentally ended up going to see Men in Black International in 3D, and it was terrible. The experience was like that. I feel like the only like film I've ever seen in like 3D that like actually felt immersive was the re-release of Nightmare Before Christmas. And
Mm.
this one, like the way that they would like Cameron set up like certain shots to where it's like there's a scene earlier in the beginning where the I'm like gonna be terrible about names this entire episode, but Natari, Zoe Saldana's character is like getting ready to shoot an arrow, and like it actually feels like it's an extension of the scene.
Mm.
And so much of like the first time that like Kitty goes underwater and like she's like exploring like the wildlife, like it feels so immersive. And I feel like also the last like sequence between like the protagonist and antagonist that I'm not gonna spoil just quite yet. That feels really immersive, and it feels like you're just completely like a fly on the wall for all the events of this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I, I haven't watched a lot of James Cameron interviews, but I can't imagine he's dying on a hill somewhere saying that he is the most original sci-fi writer of all time. Because, I mean, this isn't the first, and it won't be the last movie about an indigenous species somewhere being invaded by colonizers, and, the way of life must be protected, and they're an alien species, and the humans, or they're just different, and they value, the climate, and the humans don't. I know that James Cameron is really big into climate activism, and just trying to protect the planet more, and this definitely seems like a venue for him to talk about those issues. But it's not necessarily about how original the story is, it's about the experience for
Sure.
these films. And so if he can't present to you such an original script that you've never heard of this concept before, at least he's going to present it to you in a format that it's never been explored this well before.
Yeah.
And even some people, like 2 months ago, or 2 or 3 months ago, when the Black Panther Wakanda Forever trailer was coming out, and you saw a lot more of these blue underwater people, you're like, huh, we got two blue indigenous underwater people movies coming out this year. I wonder how they're going to rack up. And I saw so many comments like, "Oh, I bet James Cameron is pissed, or I bet he's sweating somewhere," And I was like, no way in hell is he sweating. And
No.
this confirmed it. I mean, I liked Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I thought it was a pretty good movie. But the underwater sequences, it looked like people were holding their breath. You couldn't figure out a way to not have these people playing around in this underwater community and not look like they were holding their breath. And this movie is just like, oh, we're gonna have the majority of the movie underwater, and it's gonna look real, and it's gonna look like these people just exist, around water and underwater all the time, and it's going to look as natural as possible. And yeah, I mean, he kills it with the presentation. and you know, that's fine by me. It's not a direct ripoff of plots of other films, but it's very similar to other things, as most films are to other things. You know, it's rare to find a very unique plot, but
Yeah.
it's whether or not the movie and the experience is good, and this is definitely an experience. And Yeah, I mean, 13 years later, he found a way to still expand this story and this environment, and yeah, he nailed it. And at first I thought he was a little crazy to be talking about 5 films or more, and now I'm like, dude, just, you know, just let's go. Like, I can't wait for three's supposed to come out in 2 years because they've already
Yeah.
wrapped the filming of it, and I'm like, let's do it, man. This is You're clearly putting a lot of effort into it, a lot more effort than most directors would put into a franchise. But I'm here for it because I adored it.
Yeah, and I'm also curious like to see how he like expands this world. Like I'm curious if you like stick with me on this theory is like you know the four films the first 4 films exploring because there's supposed to be 5 films, but the first 4 films are kind of exploring like a element. So like the first film, like obviously the exploration was earth, then you have this film would obviously be water. I'm curious like fire and wind essentially being like the elements of like 3 and 4.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of makes sense, although I'm sure the Avatar, the Last Airbender people will be so pissed. But but it kind of feels like that's a possibility, right? He did say if they make it to 5 films that it returns to Earth and film 5. So yeah, you got 2 more films, and why not, right? I imagine there's, you know, maybe there's a um I don't know, maybe there's like a molten lava tribe, and maybe there's an air tribe. I don't know, but yeah. Um yeah, it'd be interesting for sure. I don't know what to expect, but I'm here for it.
And before we jump into spoilers, one of the things that like I feel like this film, the reason that I personally enjoyed this film better is because I feel like Cameron sometimes, if he is just running by himself, like you can kind of definitely feel like you're wrapped up a little bit too much in like the elements of the story and kind of the visuals of the story and not necessarily like the narrative and like the character growth. And I feel like that's kind of why the first film kind of suffers a little bit for me. But this film is co-written by Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver, who also have I mean they've worked with Disney in the like before. But like before this they did Mulan, they did but the ones that like I really enjoyed that the fact that they did was the Rise and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I think those
Mm-hmm.
are like some 2 like really great quality films that take something really familiar and like expand this world and somehow like still make the characters feel personable, intimate, and like allow that growth to do. So it seems like with this movie, it definitely seems like Cameron, as a co-writer, definitely expanded the lore and the mythos of Pandora of the Navi. And but like then you have the voices of like Jaffa and Silver coming in to essentially like make sure that the narrative is like tight and it's running parallel with the world building aspect.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's just like the 3D adds depth to the visuals. I think there's a lot more depth to the characters in this film. I think even among the people that loved the first Avatar, I think a lot of people agreed that Sam Worthington's performance of Jake Sully was kind of wooden. And at one point, Sam Worthington was just set to be the next big blockbuster star, and he never really took off. And I think it's just
Mm-mm.
because a lot of people think his performance is just a little wooden. And it's crazy that there's still some people that don't know that Jake Sully role was supposed to be Matt Damon, and James Cameron offered Matt Damon 10% of Avatar, and Matt Damon turned it down
Mhm.
because he was slotted for the next Bourne movie, and he regrets it to this day, obviously. But But I do like Sam Worthington, and I like a lot of his movies. I just think he's I think he does have kind of a wooden performance, and so in this film they added depth to his character. They added a father element and a family element to his character that he didn't have in the first one. So a lot of his decisions in the first one, you could see them as ballsy, as, oh, he's taking a chance, or you could just see them as dumb. A lot of people thought that he was just a dumb guy in the first one, over the top dumb. Well, that's toned down a bit in this one because he has a family to look after and he has more responsibilities, and so that depth I think really helps his character. And then you have some other characters that we haven't talked about yet that definitely have other elements brought into their ethos that make them less cartoony and more relatable, or at least more depth to them. And so yeah, I thought the writing was good. I mean, again, it's not like a unique story, or oh my gosh, it's not mind bending from a story angle, but there's depths to connect you to characters and to bring you into their story a little more than the first one. And so yeah, I appreciated that.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Sure. So I'm just gonna throw our official spoiler warning up here. So if you guys haven't seen this movie, Way of Water, go check it out. It's now playing in theaters everywhere. Hit pause, hit the download, hit the subscribe button, come back because we're gonna spoil the mess out of this. But I just want to say that at its core, I mean, like, this movie is a revenge film. Like, I mean, when it boils down to it, you have Sam Worthington essentially versus Stephen Lang's character.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we jump into that, like, I think that, like, for this movie also too, like, when you look at 13 years, that's a long time to, like, really expand your craft with Sam Worthington's character. Mm-hmm. And I feel like just going through his, like, filmography right now, like, I feel like he's definitely expanded a lot of his character. Like, yes, he's still done, like, the dumb guy, like, action movies with, movies like, Wrath of the Titans and Clash of the Titans, but then he's also, like, taken on, like, more, like, serious roles like Hacksaw Ridge and Under the Banner of Heaven. So he's kind of really expanded his craft. And I also came across an article that, like, he also talks about, like, for this movie, he's, like, also, like, sober for the first time in his life. So I also think I feel like not only as an actor, but also as a person, like, he's definitely matured. And I feel like you could definitely see, like, they also took that under wing with with the Jake Sully character, to where, like you said, like feels like a dad, like he's a dad in this one. He's a protector. He's kind of really risen to the title of kind of like the protector of the Na'vi, which he wasn't, really in the first one. And I definitely feel like his character feels a lot more matured in this one. So much so that, like, I also, like, I don't know how you feel about this one, but I found it really interesting that the majority of the movie focuses on the next generation. So, like, Jake and Natari's kids in this one versus, like, them.
Yeah, it was a healthy balance. It wasn't a full passing the baton movie, but there was a time jump in this film from the last one. And from what I've heard, there's a 10-year time jump from this one to part 3. So I feel like they are setting up the kids as the, maybe primary characters for part 3. But it didn't feel like Jake and Natari were pushed out of the film. It just felt like, this is a family film. So they pretty much every story element had at least one kid involved. And so, and they had 4 kids, so they had enough to go around. But yeah, it did feel natural. It brought in more of the family element, and what you were talking about with Sam Worthington. I think his best films, in his big roster, he's been in a lot of films, but I think some of his best performances were not leading performances. I thought he was great in Hacksaw Ridge. I thought he was great in this movie called The Drift back in 2013. These smaller roles, I even liked him in Terminator Salvation, even though a lot of people don't like that film. But when he's not the lead character, and the camp, like, I tried to watch, he had this movie, I think it came out on Netflix, called Fractured, and it looked interesting, but it was just, he just couldn't carry it. And I like him as an actor, but I think the more you divide the movie amongst other cast members, the more it flows better. And whether or not that was a reason just because of his acting, or just, I think, a subtle pass in the baton for the next film. The movie definitely has a family element, so they definitely spread the love with screen time amongst these families. In fact, I thought that Saldana's character, Natiri, got a lot less screen time than I expected her to. But it was also kind of part of her character in this film too, and her struggling with things, and her having to, to stand by while Jake Sully continues to make decisions for the family that might not always be the best ones. But it was that family dynamic, and I liked that a lot. And then you had the family dynamic. Since we're talking spoilers, Colonel Quaritch is back, Stephen Lang's character. I was like, wait, how? But I guess they had clones of some of the bad guys already set up to go, and they were growing their avatars in the first film. So he didn't survive the first film, and I think another one of the Jarheads. I couldn't tell if all of the bad avatars were clones or just some of them were, because they never showed the transition of the people in the tanks.
I took it as like it was like an extension to where, like, it was like his entire platoon, those that were in that he commanded. Yeah, in the first film, like, they came back to kind of like, resurrect, because he does talk about it, like when he wakes up and he's like looking at like the video of like his human self, he's talking about like, hey, basically, like, this was plan B. Like, if you're watching this, we failed, but we're still gonna blend in.
Yeah, so they're back, but now they're back as avatars, as what are they called? What's the
Na'vi?
The Na'vi. They're back as Na'vi, and the element of Stephen Lang's character is that he's younger, is that he has most of the memories of Colonel Quaritch. He doesn't remember how he died, but he remembers most of it, and he has a kid. And he has a kid that was left behind at the end of the first movie. They shipped most of the humans off planet, except the good ones. They were allowed to stick around, and except for this kid who apparently was born on Pandora and was too young to put in a cryo chamber to go back to Earth. So he had to stay behind. So now Stephen Lang and his new band of baddies are back in their Na'vi form, and he realizes he has a teenage son that's running around on Pandora, and that adds a little element to his character. And I feel like they're setting him up for this long redemption arc. I hope that's not the case, but that's not what happens in this film. But it was interesting to see him back and have him a couple more layers more than the first one, because he was kind of a cartoonish villain in the first one.
He really was a cartoonish villain in the first one. I like the motivation for his character in this one. The fact that everything feels personal. I love how you kind of get like the three-dimensional aspect of like him discovering that he was a father to Spider, and kind of like how their relationship like developed throughout, to where like, you know, he was very like stoic and kind of portrayed the son for a son scene where Zoe Saldana's, you know, like, oh, I'm gonna you know, kill, and he's like, I what is he to me? He's just some kid. And but then you kind of like also get to see that like he cares about Spider, and in the end like Spider like kind of comes back to save him after Jake left him for dead, and the climax of this movie. But I'm curious to see how you felt about that, because like the whole like they're essentially bringing him back for, or setting him up for that either redemption character. Like at any time that like that happens, to where like a bad guy like either like doesn't live or doesn't go to prison, and they're like, oh, we're gonna keep him alive because we have plans for him in future installments. Fast and the Furious has really ruined that for me. So like I'm like just like picturing Jake just like looking at him being like, we were once enemies, but now we're family. Like, you know, just something along the lines of that.
Now, Stephen Lang has come out and said he is the villain for all of his performances. He said, I have read the scripts, and as long as I'm in this saga, I am the villain. Now, that could just be him trying not to reveal the twist, and I feel like that's more likely, that he's just trying not to reveal the twist. But I think for this movie it worked, because here's the dilemma: like the humans are the bad guys. Jake Sully is no longer this guy torn between two selves. He is fully Na'vi now, and the humans are the bad guys, and they make that apparent off the bat. Like they come back in force, and it's scorched earth when they come back. Like just the way that they land, they just burn everything and then just start scooping it out and effectively make this city in a desert in the middle of the woods. Like they just burned this giant desert and then built a city in a matter of like a year, because they have these bots now and they have all these things. And I thought that was very intriguing. And now it's no longer, thankfully, there was no mention of unattainium. Like the dumbest word from Avatar 1 was a metal, an element called unobtainium that was hard to obtain. Oh my God. Anyway, that's not what this movie's about. They want everything. They essentially want to move people to Pandora.
Yeah.
Now, instead of just outright killing off everything, apparently somebody in the human race thinks they should try to passively move to this. So instead of just straight up killing the Na'vi, they think their best course of action is to take out Jake Sully, who is the betrayer, and somehow if they kill him, the rest of the Na'vi will like go in line with it. I didn't really understand that part of the story. Clearly, you know why Stephen Lang's here. He wants to kill Jake Sully. But the rest of the humans going along with this plan of let's target this one guy and the rest will fall in line didn't really make enough sense to me. But having him come back and being a focusable villain instead of just treating all the humans as the overall villain, it helped for this film. But I can imagine in future installments we'll get like the next baddie or something.
Yeah, that's one of the things that like I want to like go on record. I don't necessarily hate when like villains are like repeats because like it said like this world feels lived in and it would feel like a natural extension for that world to be lived in. But I don't want necessarily to like base an entire franchise off of one bad guy versus a guy that like was a human and now is Navi. Like
Yeah.
there's because of like a basically a misunderstanding that happens or like a difference of opinion. I don't necessarily want that. And so like for me, like I don't necessarily want the I don't necessarily like the idea of Stephen Lang coming back as a continued villain in the third one or the fourth one or like whatever they do. Maybe he goes back to Earth and he's like the villain for the fifth one. I don't know. Like, but to me, it's one of those things that like I don't know. It's me not wanting to necessarily see ideas revisited.
Yeah.
And I feel like, Avatar 1 set the precedence of, as we've said, like it's an experience. Like, sure, story isn't the strongest, but it's an experience. And so when you go back and you watch Avatar: The Way of Water, it's an immersive experience with an excellent story, great visuals, and like Cameron really sets the bar high for this one and does what a lot of people thought would be impossible, but in my opinion, tops the first one and really builds upon it really successfully. And I feel like the addition of Stephen Lang would feel almost kind of like a step backwards in terms of character. I kind of like the idea of him finding redemption, but also at the same time, like I just don't know necessarily what you do with his character in future installments.
Yeah, well, he served a purpose in this one, and the 13-year
Yes.
gap between the first and the second film really helped that. So, according to James Cameron, if they continue to move forward, well, they're already done with 3. They're just doing the post production on 3. But if they continue to move forward, the rest of the sequels will be in 2 to 3 year gaps. They won't have this decade and change between them. But in this case, you needed like a reason to re-explore things. So Stephen Lang coming back as a Na'vi Quaritch, we got to see a lot of the things of the first movie through his eyes. So like him bonding with one of the dragon type things, and him learning how to speak Na'vi, and him doing different things with the help of Spider and with the help of other things. And that was kind of like a reintroduction into Pandora and the life on Pandora. And then by forcing the Sully clan to leave the tree people, to leave the tree tribe and go to a water tribe, we got another reason to explore this world, and so yeah, there's a big action climax, and there's some action in the beginning, but a lot of the meat of this film is re-exploring a different part of this planet. And that's what the first film was about. There was a lot of montages with Sully and Neytiri in the woods and learning things about the environment. Well, now they had to learn things about the SeaWorld environment, and I really liked that. And they did it so well that you're like, this is great. I'm not bored. And again, the 13 years helped that because you wanted a re-immersion into this world. You needed to be brought back in. And then once you were at a healthy point in this, they bring back the villain, and now it's on. And I liked that a lot. I liked Kate Winslet was in here, and Cliff Curtis as the kind of not king and queen of the Sea Tribe, but the leaders of the Sea Tribe. I liked them a lot. I did like the kids a lot. I think a lot of the times when you bring kids into films, it's just like, no. But I did think they were interesting characters. Sigourney Weaver playing a teenage version of herself, and her character has unanswered questions, but that seems that's clearly the point. There's more story within future films around her, but I wasn't like bored or irritated by any of the kids. I wasn't like, let's get back to Jake and Natiri. I was fine with them. And then when the big action set piece comes to the end, which is Lang taking some of the kids and the Sea Tribe and deciding whether or not they're going to back up the Stolies, and this open water battle, which was a billion times more interesting than the open water battle in Black Panther. Oh my! I'm not trying to make this a shit on Black Panther podcast, but holy shit! I mean, I thought that outside of the scene on the beach with Black Panther versus Namor, I thought that whole third act climax was just boring as hell, and this one in Avatar was like, yes, there was a sense of this isn't the end because we know there's more, but it was a sizable fight that it was climactic enough, and there were stakes and there were consequences of those stakes, and it was great, and it was like Titanic but with aliens and guns, and I loved it. I was there for it.
Well, I think really what helped the difference between the Avatar climax versus the Black Panther climax is, though they're similar in tone, the Avatar, you really got to explore and feel the developed characters of the Water Tribe, whereas the other one, it's just like, this is Namor. This is the reason why he believes what he's doing is right, and he's a bad guy, but this is the reason why. Like, that is kind of like the, really, you only developed the leader in that one. So it's like, we're going to just, take it, and it's going to be like, it's I'm more of a DC guy, so like the whole like surface world versus the water world has been done to death in Aquaman. Throne of Atlantis is a great example of it, and but here I feel like, because like we're focusing on this world, like you had said, like it brought it back to the subject of exploration, and that's what this world needed. Like that's what I feel like you need to do, is because like for this world, like this is, I don't want to say it's an original concept, but it's one of the in terms of ideas, it might not be original, but the fact that this is like something that James Cameron was like, hey, like this is something that like I've developed, these are my characters, this is my world, this is my mythology, like yeah, sure, they might seem familiar, but like in terms of like originality, like Cameron built this franchise from the ground up.
Yeah, so Pandora feels original. Yeah. The themes might feel familiar, but Pandora feels original.
Yeah. And so I think like the idea of like, all right, hey, like this is like how Earth and the section of the forest, like how the two of them have interacted, otherwise in the first film, that's fine because you still got to have that exploration. But for this one to not for them to basically say, hey, like we're just gonna kind of rehash it. We're gonna show you guys what else this world has to offer, and that's why I'm really interested in kind of seeing like if they keep up the elements of this to where maybe we meet like Fire Tribe Navari, or something like Wind Natari, or like we get like a witchcraft type of movie. I think there's a lot of, I think this movie proves that this franchise, you can do a lot of different genres with it, and yet it still feels like an extension of this world. So where in terms of like, it just feels more developed, and it feels like completely different, but also very similar to the first film.
Yeah, it's definitely more developed, and it doesn't have all the side movies or side projects to build off of. This is the second film, and yet it's come a long way in the development of its characters from the first film, and I thought that was a big win with this. Just like Alan and I talked about with other films like I'm going to keep on bringing up Black Panther because it's the last big film, but I did like Black Panther, but I did say to Alan, I felt like there were side plots that didn't need to happen.
Yeah.
There is a shorter version of Avatar 2. I think there's a whole side plot with one of the kids and the whale that went on a bit too long. Does it have a great payoff? Yes. and I liked it. I really not at any point was I like they could cut this, but
Sure.
they could have if they wanted a shorter film. I don't, James Cameron always has director cuts. This is a 3 hour and 10-minute movie. That's about the length of the director's cut of the first one. So I would wonder what the director's cut of Avatar 2 would be. If there isn't a director's cut and they just said this is what he wanted, then it would make sense, because I feel like things like that had a little more time to breathe than they do in most other films. But the payoff was great. And for a 3 hour and 10-minute movie, the pacing was on point. It did not feel like a 3 hour movie. It felt like this was moving along, and by the time each kind of section of the film was starting to feel stale, then they brought in the next piece. So I didn't feel like anything needed to be cut, but I feel like if they wanted to cut it down, there were things that could have been removed or shortened to make it a shorter film. But I'm personally glad they didn't.
Well, you brought up the kids earlier, and like the kids are the elements of movies that like they have to be written really well, because like for me, like I am not probably gonna relate to a 10-year-old having like Home Alone style adventures. To bring it back to one of our first episodes of the year, it's Home Sweet Home Alone. We don't have to talk about that, but
No.
I feel like for this one, these characters, they felt like such a natural extension, and they were really like, they were really well written characters, and they felt like so the kids, Natam, Loka, Took, Kiri, slash I thought they called her Kitty in the movie, but IMDb says Kiri.
Mm-hmm.
So and then like you also have like Spider in this movie. I feel like these characters were written really compellingly, but I talked about this in the YouTube video, but Loak, Loak, yeah, like I resonated most with him. So like the whole like PyCon Cocoon elements of this movie, like they were some of my favorites, honestly, because like I know what it's like to be the black sheep and feel like you don't belong, or to like feel like that outsider. And that to me, and like the mental health journey of those characters, like even for someone like a whale, felt like really impactful for me. And I feel like it, the Na'vi say they always greet people by saying, "I see you." And to me, I felt like a character like that really, in a major franchise like Avatar, felt to like validate past experiences that I've had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved the character. The consequences of losing is, they set it up from the beginning that he is more risky than his brother, that he is, he's less of the good faithful son, he's more of the I want to take more risks son. He's the middle child that feels like he's not going to live up to his brother or to the demands of his father, and wants to be more adventurous, and that gets him into trouble. His brother almost dies in the beginning, and definitely dies in the end, and it is largely because of his actions. But he does bring a lot to that. He's not there's other movies where similar things happen and you just hate the character because you're like, you're an idiot and you caused the death of these people and you brought nothing to the table. At least he does bring things to the table. You feel for him at the end of the film. He saves Jake Sully. He saves a lot of people, honestly, and his relationship with the whale, the outcast whale, saves a lot of people. And so you don't hate his character for being for disobeying and stuff like that. You feel for him because of just his situation, the hierarchy of his family, and how he's constantly trying, and there's consequences for some of those actions. And so again, like you said, very well written, because there's a way to write that character where you would just hate him at the end. You should have died, not your brother, type situation, but not in this film. They wrote him really well. And Kiri, with her wondering what's going on. Is she a clone of her mother? Is she some type of immaculate child from Awa? Is there a father? That people were calling that a plot hole or unanswered question. Well, it's unanswered because there's more. They didn't just forget about that. There's more to come, So I feel like that is a story that will continue to be explored. And I thought, just like they brought Stephen Lang back for his character, I thought this was an interesting way to bring Sigourney Weaver back into the franchise. It seems like James Cameron was very much wanting to bring back some of the bigger people from the first film because they were part of this big franchise, and he wants to keep them in. Thankfully, there's not going to be decades between each sequel because some of these actors wouldn't be around that much longer. So I did like bringing her back. And then the final showdown on the ship and everything, and the stakes, and that son for a son scene. That was the other thing. Neytiri, she does take a back seat in this film. She is married Jake Sully. He is the leader of their household. And while he made decisions that hurt her in the first film and that hurt her tribe, she is still loyal to him. And he makes a decision to move their family out of that tribe to a whole new place. She doesn't like it, and she's not submissive or anything, but she does follow him. And she doesn't really like Spider. She and rightfully somehow she's come over to Jake because Jake is full Na'vi now, but Spider is still a human and she doesn't like him. She really doesn't like him. And he's a reminder, and she knows who his father is, and he's a reminder of the villains. And when the villains come back, she is really torn. She's not torn. She's there to protect her family. And if that means leaving Spider behind, that's what that means. And when he comes back into the picture and there's that son for a son scene, she has just lost her eldest son, and she's straight up holding Spider by knife point. And this is a scene we've seen in other films before where the bad guy acts like he doesn't care about his son, but he kind of does. But the tension in that scene, and him like realizing that Neytiri will kill this kid, and you feeling for Neytiri, it was great. And I loved Spider seeing her just mad. Like, she was straight up killing humans, and he was like, oh my God, I need to stay away from her. I don't need to be around her. And then he gets a knife, he gets her real close, and a knife to his throat. I thought all of that was really interesting, and I'll be interested to see if she bonds more with Spider after this, or if he continues to be the outcast of the family, because it seems like Jake has officially adopted him into the family by the end of the film.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Well, so like we talk about like how the first film really, like how this film kind of amplifies what existed in the first film, and the first film with the Avatar program of Jake being human, being entrusted by the Na'vi to the part where like he is now actually full Na'vi, that is very clearly a fish out of water story. And so for this one, you kind of have that existed now with the Sully clan going into Kate Winslet and Cliff Curtis's water tribe. and you kind of get to see how that expands. And then at the center of that, which is kind of like right on the outskirts of that, you have Spider, who is basically a human that's almost like feels like Navi, and almost like
been raised by the Navi. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And like to this point where like Jake has kind of like almost adopted him as like one of his own. And I'm almost curious if like that is something like out of like guilt, to where he's like, yeah, my bride killed your father, so as a way of penance, I'm going to keep you around and I'm going to raise you alongside characters like Norm and some of the characters that still have a small role to play in this one. And I think this movie does Outsiders really well, to where the themes and kind of like the mental health aspects of those. I think obviously you have like Natiri, that kind of it weighs really heavily on her, to where this is the world that she's known her entire life, and then to uproot and then have to go live essentially with the Sea Clan is a great exploration. But I feel like one of the things that this movie does really well is it actually, you feel the impact when Natim dies in the third act, where like you can definitely see like this is a woman driven by grief. And probably one of my favorite sequences in this movie is Natari on the ship going after and killing all of these Tikkun hunters. And I think that like you kind of get to see the heightenedness of that grief, to where she's like, you took something from me, I'm going to take something from you. And I liked how this shows like the really like raw nature of grief, but also the importance of actually like having time to properly grieve, because they're not necessarily given that in the movie because of the Lang character coming to hunt for them.
Yeah, when Natiri loses her son, and Jake is like, I need you to come with me. We need to get our other kids. I can't, you can't stay here to grieve. I need you to come with me. And she doesn't, she doesn't say, okay, boss, I'm ready. She just has that blank look on her face and like, fine. And then she gets there and just mad starts killing and screaming and killing, and then breaks her father's bow. And it's just another dagger to her chest, the hits keep coming. I just feel like there's going to be a lot of fallout for her character. I feel like she's going to have a lot of grief to granted, there's a 10-year jump between this film and the next film, but I'll be interested to see where her character goes, because she's put through the ringer so much. And that was it was a great development of her character. I did like a couple things that I thought was a little over top in the first film. One, I didn't like the sense that Jake not only was accepted into the tribe, but was accepted as the new leader of the tribe. In the first film. I liked that he tamed the giant dragon and was this tool to unite the people in this big war. But I didn't like that he was, at the end, he kind of seemed like he took over her father's role. They retconned that at the beginning of this film when he decides to leave. He gives that crown to somebody else, and now he's just of the people, and they don't try to make him the leader of the Sea Clan at the end. He's just among them. I liked that. I thought that was it wasn't a retcon, but they fixed that element. I also thought in the first film that the Na'vi were such amazing people, and they were very creative fighters, and they were ferocious and presented as ferocious in the beginning. But then when the humans first attacked, they suddenly became like dumb, and they didn't know what to do. And all of a sudden they were getting wiped out. And Jake Sully had to teach them almost how to fight this force. When in the beginning, Stephen Lang's character was like, everything on this planet is here to kill you, especially the Na'vi. And so while they did come back and have a good fight at the end, I thought there was part in Avatar 1 where suddenly they were so shocked that the bad guys were killing trees that they just became helpless. Well, that wasn't the case in this film. When they come to fight, they came to fight, and the Sea Tribe was there, and they were ferocious. And I thought that was great. I thought that was the finale was just this awesome water fight scene with fire and underwater and up in the air and all these elements coming at a head. And you really did feel like even though the bad guys had guns and had newer mech suits and had all these like underwater gadgets, it was still like a pretty balanced. Yeah, the claws and everything.
Yeah, the crab guys.
Yeah, the crab guys. Yeah, that was cool. Like it was neat elements, new elements. Even the mech suits were different, and I liked it. I just liked it. But then it wasn't like and we set the humans off again at the end of the film. There's still this human element that's still there, and they're growing. And Stephen Lang isn't dead. Spider decides to save him, which you get why he saved him. But I was glad that he didn't go with him at the end. You know, he was like, "Fuck you. I'm just not an asshole. I saved you, but I'm not going with you."
Yeah.
So I did like that. But I imagine what I would like to see if Stephen Lang only goes through another film. What I liked about this film is that he initially thinks Jake Sully is the one that killed him. You know, he's like, "Well, I'm dead, and I'm guessing it was Jake." And then he watches the footage and realizes it was Neytiri that killed him. So I want to see if there's another baddie that comes on the scene in Avatar 3, let Jake fight that other baddie. I want Lang to fight Neytiri. I want to see that breakdown, especially if Neytiri is going to be older. But she's still going to hate him. And I feel like they need their own battle, not just a little shoot off skirmish in the woods, because he keeps on calling her like Mrs. Sully and stuff like that. Yet she's the one that killed him. And I believe she is owed that one-on-one with him in the third film.
Oh, absolutely. I really think that like even if like they don't meet again until like the fourth film, I think you're gonna get that confrontation. So my prediction for the third film is that that human element is going to be a little bit more centralized. And one of the things I feel like not a lot of people are talking about is the fact that like, so we're introduced the human element in this one isn't just the, hey, we're terraforming Pandora, but also there are these fishermen that are Tikkun hunters, and they are hunting the Tikkun because there's an element within their jaw that actually allows the human aging process to stop. Mm-hmm. And it's this like throwaway like monologue from the film's one of the characters, the captain of the ship, and I'm like, I really feel like this is going to be kind of like coming back in some way, shape, or form, similarly to like who is like Kiri's like actual like father. Like, is she a clone? Is she not? It is like, is she tied to Enya? Like all of these questions that I feel like this film left unanswered, I think they're going to be building up for like payoffs in part 3, part 4, part 5.
Yeah, because Kiri was essentially a vessel for Awa at the end there. She was using plants and ocean life to attack and straight up murder some dudes in the water. And so she's definitely accepting that. And so I feel like there's more to her. I did like the fisherman stuff. Jermaine Clement from Flight of the Conchords was an interesting addition to the cast. Maddie was like, "Oh my god, it's him!" And that was one of the things I knew that was in this film, and I was waiting for him to come up. So I liked that he wasn't a villain. I think he survived. I think he was thrown upon the rocks and not killed. So who knows if we'll see more of him. But I did like that fisherman's element, but it didn't, it just felt like another thing. Like, not only basically humans have used up the resources of Earth, and so they want Pandora. But while they're here, they're going to start killing off the wildlife and already start using those resources for things, because I mean, the vial that they took from that whale, he said it was like an $80 million vial, but it still wasn't a lot, So
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine if they kept that up, they'd kill all those whales pretty quickly, and it just felt like another thing, like they haven't even moved to this planet and they're already trying to wipe out a species for their own benefit. So it solidified their villainy as in my eyes.
Yeah, and like that also too, like I'm curious, like, and I guess like maybe this is just like me, like being a little bit nostalgic, but let's just say, for instance, that like it stops the human aging process, but it also, on the flip side, creates an addiction. Because what if do you remember that episode of Batman the Animated Series where it's called Feet of Clay? It's where we get to meet Clayface, and he's like, Matt Hagen's an actor, and John Daggett essentially creates this facial cream that can like manipulate and then he ends up becoming Clayface. Like, what if like the Cocoon blood is like something very similar? Like it de-ages you, but like, does it de-age you at the current age that you're at and stop it? Or like, do you get to pick like, I enjoy being 22 and like kind of like get to pick the age that you stop at? Or is it just something that you stop? Is it a multi-use thing, or is it like you have to use it every day kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure things like that will be explored. It was interesting that there was no attack on the human compound in this film, but it definitely feels bigger than they said that those little machines could build a building in 6 days. So it's a freaking city with highways and everything that they built in a year.
Yeah.
And it's surrounded by desert because they scorched everything on the descent. And so I do wonder how long it will be before the Na'vi are like, we got to shut this down, otherwise they're just going to bring in more people. And it definitely feels, those are his environmental messages, that they're 100% destruction. They haven't even moved here, and yet the idea is that they're likely moving here because Earth is on its way out the door. Well, they're already becoming such a destructive force here that they'll just do it even faster here. So I do like that element, but I do want more of the human element in future films, because I feel like it's something that they need to address, or we need more of that. But this was a healthy balance. Not having as many humans allowed for a lot more CGI, and with the exception of like a couple small scenes, it all just looked so crisp, and you could tell the differences between characters, especially with the kids. I could imagine a lesser film, you being like, okay, which one's which? They're young, they're blue. How the fuck am I supposed to tell the difference between them all? And you can, they're just little facial elements and the different things. There's a lot that they put into these characters so that that they're all different. And then the differences between the tree folk and the sea tribe, how their tails are different and their arms are different. And they've naturally evolved that way because of their environment. I love that stuff. I love the shark stuff. I love just every little bit. And then Kiri's connecting more and more with Awa. There was just so many elements in this film that I thought was really, really well done and really brought you into it. And I heard that there's something that they're calling Pandora syndrome, where it's like people get so immersed that they're like, oh my God, I want to go back. Like, I don't want it to be over. And it is an experience. I mean, what did they do after James Cameron's Terminator 2? They made it into a ride. What has James Cameron in his life done? He hasn't just been behind the camera. He's gotten into the water and done deep sea diving and filming, and because he's obsessed with that. And this was a this was a way for him to take all of those obsessions and love of his life and put it into one film, and he did it spectacularly. And he's even said that he would likely be willing to pass the baton in terms of directing for future sequels, if he could find the right director. So that means that, unlike some other people, like, maybe your Michael Bay's or other people that might feel like, no, this is mine, I have to do it. He's invested in the saga, not necessarily him being at the helm the whole time, but he does feel invested in this story, and I hope it makes money. I hope people go see it, and I hope 4 and 5 get greenlit, because this could be one of the most amazing sci-fi sagas out there. Certainly one of the most expensive sci-fi sagas, but at least you could walk out of here and be like, man, that was money well worth spent, because it looks amazing. This was not a cheap film. It didn't look like a cheap film. Didn't look like they cut corners. And if they got the technology down pat now and they can just start churning out these sequels, let's do it. I want to see them.
Yeah, what's that quote from Cameron in the press tour, that they would have to make like $2 billion just to break even?
Well, that was taken out of context too, because I think that was like between the two films, because they filmed 2 and 3 back to back. When they actually,
fair enough,
when there was John Campea and some other online reviewers went back and looked at the actual budget for this film, and everything like that, and estimated that with advertising and everything, it was closer to, they need to break like 800-900 million, which is still a lot, but in terms of Avatar, that seems doable. So the 2 billion thing, I think, was taken out of context and likely for the franchise, not this specific film. But Avatar, he said it. He's like, I don't know the fate of 4 and 5. I've written this as a franchise to include 4 and 5, but 3 is in the bag. We know 3 is coming out regardless. So it's up to marketing and fans and the support if the 4 and 5 come out. But at least we'll get a trilogy out of this. So
yeah, and so IMDb lists the estimated budget at $350 million.
Yeah,
which again, like when you look at it's a lot. Yeah, you look at other like big studio tentpole films and like franchises like the DCEU or Marvel, the comic book movies. These movies are being made mostly between 180 to 200 million dollars.
Yeah. And Endgame was 356.
Yeah. So like, I think this one, I think they're definitely going to make their money back. Obviously, it's not taking into account marketing again, but I think this one, much like with the original film, you don't necessarily need a whole lot of marketing for this film, because this has been hotly anticipated since 2009. This has been a film that people have wanted to see for many years. So much point to like this movie's got delayed like multiple times, hasn't it?
Oh yeah.
And so
for several reasons, mostly technology based, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely like well worth the wait. I did want to ask this and see what you thought about it. So in the first movie, when Jake is in the Avatar and he can only speak the English, Norm and Natiri teach him how to speak the Na'vi language.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Stephan-Lang comes out, and one minute he's discovering that he's a Na'vi, and the next he knows how to speak their language. That kind of felt like a plot hole to me.
Mm. Well, I mean, sometimes you can't really tell the passage of time in this film. Sometimes they'll be like 1 year later. Other times it'll be like, well, okay, how long have they been hunting for Jake? Have they been hunting for him for a week? Have they been hunting for him for several months? You don't really know, but you get the sense that they were waking up in transit, the avatars, and they had that video with Stephen Lang where it was kind of like the entry video to like a game or to a ride, like getting you prepped, getting you pumped. And so it seemed like when they started going out with Spider, they had like a child's learning of the language, and then Spider had to be like, okay, well, you sound like a 3-year-old. I'm gonna help you out and teach you how to talk slang and regular and everything like that. I mean, when they were trying to not throw Jake Sully into the deep end, there was a whole course on learning how to be Na'vi, and they were teaching English to the Na'vi. So that means that the humans, to some extent, knew the Na'vi language. So I imagine, there was some type of training course to teach Stephen Lang and his crew like basic Na'vi, and then Spider kind of helped fill in the gaps. So I don't know. I mean, maybe that's one of the things that just wasn't all on screen. I did think it was interesting when they decided we're going to have less Na'vi in this film, and they did the transition to English. Like, Jake, like, I spent so much time learning this language, but now it just sounds like English to me. And then they just switched. So you don't see a lot of Na'vi language in the film, which they probably did that for the benefit of bringing more people in. There's a lot of people that just don't like subtitles or don't like other languages, and so the more accessible, the better, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, it also too, like, it could be like one of those things that, like, as like the avatars like developing, and it could be like also like similar into the like was that theory that like if you play like classical music, or like if you play any kind of music and you put it on like the mother's womb, like the baby can hear it, kind of thing. So maybe it's like, hey, we're just gonna take that same approach, and we're gonna feed you guys like the Navavi, yeah, whatever.
The Na'vi.
The Na'vi language, and that way when you're come out, like, you can just kind of go right to it.
Yeah, I'm sure they're trying to streamline that somehow, but especially if they continued down this route of bringing in Na'vi. I guess, I mean, I was wondering why they were going to do that. Like, no Na'vi was going to see them and be like, yeah, you're one of us. You're one of us, but you're dressed like Marines. But it gave them tactical advantages and stuff like that, and it made them more, they could bond with the dragons and be more immersed into the experience, and then be that much more of a threat. So that, I did like that. But
like, so
go ahead.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, I have a love-hate relationship with that, because like there's a point where like Stephen Lang's character is like, we're gonna eat Na'vi, we're gonna speak Na'vi, we're gonna be Na'vi. And so like when you go back to like the first film, and like even the brief interactions we have with the Forest Na'vi in this film, they are very like primitive in terms of like style. So it's like very like warrior driven, to where it's like the women have coverings for their breasts, and then both sexes have covers for their genitalia. Like, that's kind of the wardrobe that we were introduced into this. And these guys never embrace that, but also B, at the same time, they have tattoos, which I thought was like cool imagery, and I really liked it. But like also at the same time, like, you guys are still gonna stick out like sore thumbs.
Yeah, I mean, they're still jarheads at the end of the day, and I imagine it was less of it was less of espionage and more just, we're going to live in the element. We're going to get in the mind of our prey and stuff like that. So, yeah, when they said that, I was like, well, that's to a point, because you're still carrying around all your guns and your gear and everything. But I did like them as a force, because they were pretty formidable to a point. I mean, they didn't go down that easily, and especially not Lang. And the end fights between them all, I did like that element. So I thought really Jake Sully and Quaritch, fist to fist was they were going at it. So and they wouldn't have had that element if not for the bad Na'vi avatars. So I liked it. And I like talking to this about you because I came into this as a strong fan of the first one, and you came into it as not that great of a fan of the first one. And I feel like that is the hurdle of this film is that, yeah, they don't need to do that much advertising to get the fans back, but they've got to find a way to convince people to come to this movie that didn't come before. That is why Endgame succeeded. Endgame brought so many people into the MCU franchise that had never been there before. It was if you haven't tried this out yet, now's the time because this is the big one. It got all these people to come in. They didn't make all that money just on MCU fans going to see it multiple times. It was an influx of a new audience dynamic that had not seen or really been a part of theatrical runs of the previous MCU films. So if Avatar is going to continue to be such an expensive project, they're going to need to bring in more people. And so if that's anything I can say is I think there are going to be people that didn't care for the first one but likes this one because there is an expansion on everything. Expansion of the world building, expansion of the character depth, expansion of the story. And I feel like it's a worthy sequel. And that's what you would want. You would want not more of the same. You would want more layers and a reason to come back. And I think there is a valid reason for people that didn't like the first one to check this one out.
Absolutely. I feel like this movie definitely impacted a difference of like I feel like this film is funnier. I feel like it's more heartfelt, and I feel like the action sequences are done a lot better. That a lot of people that were in my camp that like didn't like the first film, and they'd be like, "Oh, you saw Avatar 2. Like, what'd you think of it?" And I was like, honestly, like go see it. And go see it on the biggest screen possible. Make sure it's in 3D because this is one of the best theatrical experiences I promise that you will have this year. And I feel like, yeah, like we've in a year where you've gotten movies like The Batman and Top Gun, like where you've gotten these really just amazing experiences for film. At the end of this year, you get something grand and engrossing like Avatar: The Way of Water. And I feel like this is a movie that I'm going to be really sad when it comes to Blu-ray because I'm like, I can't experience it the same way I experienced it, the times that I went to go see it in theaters. And like, I'm coming out of this and I always thought it was really funny that like, I read a quote from James Cameron interview, and he had said that it doesn't matter if you have to go go to the bathroom because I guarantee people will come back multiple times.
Yeah,
and I always thought that was like man, I was like way to be so cocky. And coming out of this movie, I was like, dang, I was like, I honestly can't wait to see it again, and I'm planning my second trip either before the end of the year or like beginning of next year because like this movie is just it's absolutely like stunning and it's absolutely one of the best films of the year.
Yeah, and seeing it on the biggest screen you can is definitely ideal. I lately we have an IMAX in town and we have a FOMAX. The IMAX is a little more of a drive, and we have a fake IMAX, which is just kind of a giant square screen, but it's not IMAX true like ratios and everything. So I've really been going more to a Dolby screen, which I like because they're loud and they're crisp and they're great. The colors are fine and everything. And so Dolby is usually my go-to experience. But for this, I wanted to see it in IMAX and I wanted to see it in 3D because that was the native thing. And it restored my faith in 3D filmed projects, not post-production 3D. And it restored my faith in IMAX because it was amazing. And I don't know if it was just an IMAX preview or not. So you didn't see it in IMAX, right?
No, I've only seen the Batman and Nope in IMAX this year.
Okay. Well, I don't know if this was specific just to IMAX or not, but they had two previews in front of Avatar 2. One was for Dead Reckoning, and it was this huge behind the scenes thing of the ramp that they designed and the base jumping off of motorcycle. It was like a 6-minute long behind the scenes thing with Tom Cruise doing this base jump. And they fly over this quarry. They had to set up this ramp that was so far up that everything had to be flown in by helicopter over months. And then they just continue to show him going off this ramp over this quarry in IMAX. And you're like, oh my God, it is breathtaking. And then they also had an Oppenheimer trailer, new Oppenheimer trailer in IMAX. That is Christopher Nolan's new film, who, Christopher Nolan, again, somebody that wasn't the first to film in IMAX, but really pioneered IMAX and making it more of a big part of the feature film. And yeah, I kind of missed being, going to see these IMAX films. And they're most of the time, just like with 3D, it's not filmed in IMAX. They just stretch it out. And I'm like, I don't need to see a romantic comedy in IMAX. But for things like this, hell yes. And while I'm not going to see it with my mom in IMAX because she can't take the 3D, I'm sure it'll still look beautiful on Dolby. But yes, this is not a wait till you see it on your phone film. This is a biggest screen you can. If you can see it in 3D, do it. If you can't, just see it in a big screen, because it is an immersive experience, and I think that is part of it. I think you have to be immersed in it to care about it. And I think it succeeded in that way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore. I think this movie works better in a big screen capacity. I feel like there are certain movies that we live in a world now where you can watch movies on your phone. And I feel like there are certain movies that don't have that same experience if you don't watch them on a big screen. Whether that's a big screen television or that's something like IMAX or a theatrical setting, is movies like Avatar, you definitely need to have that be. That's why, like, when I went back and revisited the first film, I was like, all right, I need a big screen to watch this on. So wife and I just upgraded our television over the holiday, and it's like, boom, I'm going to watch it on this. And I feel like that kind of experience really made me actually care about the Na'vi and this world of Pandora that James Cameron has created.
Yeah, I agree. I heard it's the term, don't bet against James Cameron. I mean, just look at him. I mean, there's not a lot of people that would dedicate this much time to this. I mean,
Yeah.
He spent 13 years working on this film. You know how many movies he could have done in 13 years? And then tack that on to the 10 years he spent on the last film. You know how many movies he could have done since in the span that he's worked on Avatar? Now, he's produced other films and things like that, and he's put his banner, his banner and his word behind other films like Terminator, Genesis, or whatever the last one was that he was like, this is the best one. Unless he's directing it, I don't trust Jim Cameron's word that it's going to be an amazing film. Other than Alita was great. And if he wants to take a break from Avatar and go do Alita 2, let's do it. It's another A film that's heavy CGI, and I adored it. But the fruits of his labor are two fantastically impressive looking films. And even seeing the first one again remastered last month, I was like, man, it just looks so good. How I can't wait to see this new one that they've spent 13 more years working on. And it really does. It's the fruits of their labor are all on screen, and it's fantastic. So I loved it. I can't wait for part 3, which is supposed to be coming out in 2024. He's currently saying we plan for December 2024. I wouldn't be surprised if that's pushed back a little bit, but the fact that it's already filmed gives me a little more hope, because they've been, this used to be like a 2020, 2022, 2024 thing, and then it's now we're here. But I don't imagine we have that long of a wait till the next one, and I can't wait for it. So, but hopefully people come out for this one and Disney decides that this is a worthy thing to continue on because now they own it, and maybe they'll learn some lessons from it as well. But yeah, Weta did amazing, James Cameron did amazing, and the cast did amazing, and I can't wait for more.
Yeah, I think the fact that Disney owns this property now is definitely it says a lot that I don't necessarily think we're gonna wait, that long to see it again.
Yeah, but how much money did Disney spend on it
That's fair.
versus the predecessor? Granted, they took on the debt, but yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised, like, if, like they were like, hey, we're gonna drop this and this is gonna be a summer blockbuster. Or they bump it up to 2023. I don't want them to rush it. Like I feel like a portion of why I enjoyed this movie so much was the fact that it was so like long in development. Again, some of that is COVID, some of that is technology, as you previously mentioned. But I feel like the reason why this was so impactful was because of the wait. I feel like it definitely paid off in the end.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we've said our ratings yet for this. I would give it a 4.5 out of 5. I thought, and that's not being crazy critical. I thought there were just some things that some elements that were kind of scratching my head a little bit on, but I do feel like it was a very well-made sequel. It didn't feel like a middle film. So many times now, when we know there's another film coming, the first film or the second film just feels like, it's a step. It's not a full film on its own. This does feel like a full film.
Absolutely.
It doesn't feel like an end at the end of it because more is there. But there was a story structure to it, and it did have a finale, and that finale was satisfying. At first, I was like, when they were setting up the finale, I'm like, oh, is this the final battle? Like, is this where we're gonna have it? And I questioned whether or not it was gonna be epic enough compared to the onslaught of the first one. And it was epic, and it was just because of how it was filmed and the elements and the stakes. So it was a very well-made sequel, not just an Avatar sequel, but sequel in general. So a 4.5 out of 5 is how I'd rate it.
Yeah, so I going back to like my feelings on the first film, like I have this like relationship now to where like I don't necessarily love it, I don't necessarily hate it the way that I formerly did, and I probably like wouldn't be a movie that I watch very often. So it's like that's a 3 out of 5 for me, but I think this one amplifies what makes the first film work. And then kind of like retcons what doesn't make it work, as we've kind of talked about over the last like hour and a half. And so like for me, like I would give this a 4 out of 5. I think this is a really strong foundation for future installments. I think all the performances are good. The way that this world immersifies the audience and comes in and just absolutely engrosses you with its 3-dimensional aspects. Seeing this in 3D, but also at the same time, like this film just looks gorgeous. And some of the things that like I think this movie does really well is just the fact that like when you go back and you watch the first film compared to this one, the elements of this movie actually feel really beautiful because I think with the elements of like how the technology looks, like going back and like something as simple as like hands in this movie, like you go back and you're like, okay, like I can definitely tell that those are 3D, but like it just feels like a natural extension in this one. So I'm not sure if it was like a mixture of like practical effects and the technology effects of like mocap, but like this film's absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah, there's a lot of elements that I would if there was a full documentary on the behind the scenes of filming these movies, I would be here for it. I love the behind the scenes of the first film because they, when you think about how many elements of these films with the creatures are CG, they could have easily just been like, okay, we want you to look at this dot and try to, emote to it. They didn't do that. They they made scales, models, or like foam things, or they brought in horses, or they brought in things to kind of make it feel like those creatures were with them with the mocaps. And I think things like that pay off. And they did have a lot of actors underwater, and a lot of them had to hold their breath for a while filming this. They filmed a lot of it underwater, as James Cameron would. And I love that type of stuff. I think, even with shitty films like Alien Resurrection, when you take elements like they built an entire set in a pool for that one sequence in Alien Resurrection where they're swimming around underwater, and it pays off. And I mean, those are risks. They not only cost a lot of money, but you're wondering if they'll pay off, and they paid off in this film. So yeah, I feel like I've talked this film to death. I could keep talking about it, but it's a strong recommendation for me. And
Same.
Yeah, that's all I can say.
Yeah, same, absolutely. And so I want to just let us know what you guys thought about it. But speaking of social media, where can people find you online?
Well, Alan and I are going to be expanding our nerd talk, our Marvel correspondence in the coming year. We haven't decided what we're going to have. Our own. It's not going to be a separate show, but we're going to have our own name for it. We're working on that, but you can expect to see me more on a monthly basis with Alan on that. Otherwise, I also do some nerd talk with my good buddy Seth over at Nerf Herders Assemble on Facebook and Amazon, Facebook and YouTube. And my writing, I do write some sci-fi and some horror stuff. You can find that at Fierce Literature or fiercelit.com. And I'm preparing for some new shows, Comic-Cons and everything in the new year. So I'm out there.
You guys can follow me. I am on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, also making sporadic TikToks over at Gent Ghostface, Gent. Lots of horror content over there. You guys can check out my other podcast, Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast, which is one of our sister shows. But you guys can follow us on victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can find links to our social media, more podcasts, movie reviews, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. And of course, wherever you guys get your podcasts from, and consider supporting us on Patreon as well. Thank you guys for listening. And until next time, remember to stay on Pandora, because more is to come.
Mm-hmm.